Welcome back. We're discussing the efforts of peace activists to break the crippling siege on Gaza, even before the current round of fighting began. Now, I'm joined by British Member of Parliament Claire Short, who was on the Free Gaza movement's boat to the Strip last November. And in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US, we have Cynthia McKinney, who was on the Dignity from Cyprus on the eve of December the 30th, when the Israeli Navy rammed the boat and forced it to Lebanon. Cynthia McKinney, you wanted to make a point. I'm sorry I had to take the break there, but you wanted to comment on some of the issues raised.
Yes, I did. I just wanted to elaborate on what Claire said earlier, and that is we are looking at a tremendous military machine that has been put together by the Israelis with the assistance of the United States government. And we see them using the tanks, the white phosphorus, the depleted uranium. They possess nuclear weapons, in fact, the nuclear triad. And so they would like to talk about a few arms being smuggled in for the purpose of resistance, which is, as Claire made clear, available resistance to the people against occupation. And yet we're talking about what is deemed to be the fourth most militarily potent government in the world, and they dare to talk about a few arms that may come through a few tunnels.
Well, let's get in Abdul on the line from London, who's got a question or comment. Abdul, what would you like to ask?
I think one of the shameful things of this conflict is of the fact that 60 years ago, the world was mobilizing behind Israelis for what was happening in Germany. And as I said, 60 years now, Israel is doing the same thing against the Palestinians, and the world is sitting not doing anything about it. Which other country in the Middle East might be the next victim? Do we think this will make, we don't think this will make most of the country determined to stand for themselves and try to be strong, for example, like Iran, trying to protect themselves because they think the international community will not be there for them if they fall victim.
Right.
I think that I would like the panel to think about
I'd like to put it to Claire Short and also add an email, perhaps, Ms. Short, if I may, that came in from Canada. MD in Waterloo in Canada wrote in saying, I agree that Israelis have the right to live in their towns without fear of bombardment and that some Hamas members show a stunning degree of disregard for human life. And I also agree with countless others around the world that Israel's actions are massively out of proportion to the problems they faced. One of the many horrors of this Gaza war is the negative reputation that Israelis will have for a long, long time to come. Current political leaders in Israel are passing this legacy onto their children. And I wonder, looking at what's going on here and based on some of the comments, how you think Israel might be judged in time to come on what they're doing right now?
I think this behaviour is against the interests of Israel. I mean, they're killing and killing, and the whole world is seeing them as monstrously out of control, monstrously in breach of international law, killing a captured population. If Israel wants to be a safe country in the Middle East getting on with its neighbours, it ought to respect international law, make peace and have two states on the basis of 67 boundaries, and then everyone could go forward. But Israel doesn't want that. It wants to constantly expand. It's drunk with power. It wants to dominate the whole region, and it's storing up hatred for itself and terrible suffering and bitter division in the region and in the world.
Okay, Mirza's on the line from Canada. Mirza, what would you like to ask?
Yes, hi. First of all, I'd like to say hi to Ms. Short and Ms. McKinney, as well as to you, Riz.
Thank you.
My question is basically, do you think more and more people in the West are learning about the on-ground realities that exist in the occupied territories, especially the role of the internet and alternative media? And also, just a follow-up to that, do you think does that really matter? I mean, the governments, the Western governments, and Israel care about their own people's changing opinions about the whole conflict?
Interestingly enough, I put this to Cynthia McKinney. It's been shown, I guess, that U.S. public opinion is often completely out of line with what the U.S. administration seems to decide to do. How do you think, how do you regard the way the U.S. administration has handled what's going on right now?
Well, actually, I can tell you that the people in the United States, there is a tremendous sense of outrage, and it's being expressed on the streets all over our country. In fact, I'll be in Washington, D.C. participating in a protest on Saturday, and then on the following Wednesday, I'll be in New York City participating in another protest. And I think that people who have not really paid very much attention to foreign policy are now paying attention because of what is happening in Gaza and the actions of the Israelis.
Let's get Jeff on the line from Jerusalem. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Yes, I would actually add there's two things. One thing, I'd like to point out that what Mrs. Short said, that the ceasefire was observed for 5 months, is simply blatantly untrue. There wasn't a week that passed without rockets being fired from Gaza. Not always by Hamas, but Hamas controls Gaza. But my main point is that I'd like to know if Mrs. Short can produce, either the two ladies, a Hamas spokesman, someone who represents Hamas, not them speaking for the Palestinians, but the freely chosen government, who would be prepared to say under what circumstances Hamas is prepared to live side by side with the Jewish state.
Okay. Claire Short, you actually met, I think, with Ismail Haniyeh, the elected Hamas Prime Minister, when you were on your trip on the Dignity when you got into Gaza. What was brought up, and how would you address what Jeff has just raised?
He said the international community had asked for three things of Hamas. One, to stop the use of violence and terror, as it's called, and they'd agreed to the ceasefire and adhered to it, and that's the view of all experts who monitored the ceasefire. Two, they were asked to recognise Israel, and what he said was that Israel doesn't recognise a Palestinian state, but they were willing, if the Palestinian state on the basis of 67 boundaries was allowed, to do a mutual recognition and a 50-year ceasefire. And the third thing they were asked was to acknowledge all previous agreements, most importantly Oslo. And he said, although Hamas didn't think it was a good agreement, they absolutely recognised that the legitimate PLO had made that agreement. So actually, and this is part of the lies, the problem of the lies, they have adhered to the three things that have been asked of them by the international community, and everyone pretends that they didn't.
But in terms of actually making it very clear to the international community and to Israel, I guess, that there is a willingness on the part of Hamas to put aside its view on Israel, to actually have a more conciliatory attitude, surely there should be a more direct statement from Hamas.
Well, I was reading an article by Avi Shleim. He's a famous Israeli historian that he wrote in the last couple of days, and he makes absolutely clear that people who follow events know that that's the Hamas position, that since Hamas won the election and took power, as so often happens, they've taken this more compromised position and made it clear that they were willing to compromise. Right. But Israel doesn't want peace. It wants the land without the people. It wants to show its power. It wants to ethnically cleanse. It's in a sort of drunkenness with power that might is right, that is badly against its interests in the long term, as well as causing terrible suffering for the Palestinian people.
Let me get with less than a minute to go. Cynthia McKinney, your view on how perhaps the image of Arabs and the Arab world might change in America based on what's going on, because until now, especially post 9/11, there's been a pretty negative view on the Arab world compared with Israel for a lot of people in the US.
Well, of course, that's been helped by a partisan press that would like to carry on certain stereotypes against the Arab community in the United States. I would also just like to say that we're still waiting for a cogent response to the pain and suffering and the sights that are being witnessed from our president-elect as well, who roared onto the political scene like a lion, but has remained to date as silent as a lamb.
I'm sorry I have to end it there. And Claire Short, Cynthia McKinney, glad to have you both on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're out of time, but thank you for being with us. On the next show, we look at the role of the Arab governments in this war on Gaza. Have they been as effective as they could have been? And how does this bode for so-called Arab moderates? From me and the team, we'll see you next time.